In this lesson, we'll be creating scrolling scenes, if you will, where we actually expand our universe and making our game size larger than the screen size, and then following the character around as he moves through the scenes that actually go beyond the borders, if you will. What I'm going to suggest is you actually start with the exercise from your double jumps. It was 5D in this year's list, but it's the double jump exercise that I'm starting with here today. So if I just run the file as is, this is what I start with, again from our double jump exercise. And again, we're working in an iPad environment, so I think it's 1024 by 768 pixels on this particular one. I've got left and right motion, and I've also got a jump feature built in with the spacebar, and I have my double jump feature, which gives me a second jump while I'm in midair. I don't have a third jump, of course, and that's why I called it double jump. So let me bring this guy back down to the ground plane here. So imagine I'm scrolling along here, and I want to actually go beyond this wall. Let's say there's a whole nother chamber over here, or a whole platform of elements that I might want to pick up or have to avoid situations with. I need to expand my screen size and then give the camera the ability to follow this character throughout. And that can work up and down as well as left and right. So what I propose to do is actually make the scene much larger, and we'll just move some of these blocks around and create an extended scene, if you will. And then we will figure out how to move with our character out of scene. So I'm just going to go back to editor, and I am on the scene tab here right now. So let's just open up the size. And as you see, it's 1024 by 768. I'm just going to roughly double that. So I think that would be 2048 pixels. And then on the height, and you saw that my scene actually opened up there, right? When I open this up more, you'll notice it. 768 times 2, that's about this. I'm just going to rough it out to 1600. There we go. And if I hide my backstage area, you can see our scroll bars will allow us to move through there. And our original screen size is still outlined with this outer line. And I'll mention it right now. The inner line represents what's called the camera, and we're going to get to that very shortly. And you can also see the center point for our scene. But you can see here I have a lot more height now that I can potentially access through gameplay, as well as a lot more width. So why don't we just move some of these guys over here, and I'll stretch that floor area to the full width of the movie. And we'll just throw a few of these guys around here. Maybe some lower ones. I'm just using my alt click and drag here. All right. And maybe a few up above as well. Actually, let's expand this guy up. Okay, we'll just make that bigger there. All right, let me scroll back down. Okay, just a little tweaking. And I'll grab some of these and just make some new forms up a little higher up. Just mixing things up a bit here. Alt click and drag to duplicate. Okay, and maybe a couple more of these guys. All right, and I'm going to move my player high up. And actually, I'll move him so that he lands on this first surface. So let's just see what we get here. And what you can see is, well, you can't see beyond the borders yet. So I'm going to introduce the camera control at this point, which will get attached to one of the actors. And in this case, we're going to attach it to the player, the little purple actor. Okay, but right now, even if I can move it, you wouldn't see it right away. I can maybe try to move him off there, and there he comes. I was using my right arrow key to get him to move. But if I move this way, again, he will just simply depart the scene. And I actually want to follow him down the road there. All right, so let's go back here, and we'll allow for that. I do have the actor hero selected. And these are all of my previous rules and so on. So I'm going to add another feature here, and it's a very simple one, in fact. If we go up to our library in our behaviors, it's called control camera. So just look for it here, control camera, and you simply drag that in. There's no parameters to reset on that. What that does is it basically creates a magnet where the camera will follow this guy around. There's two parts to this process, so let me show you the second part now. I'm just going to hide my backstage for a bit here and scroll up. I am at the top here. Let me just move this guy a bit lower here. Okay. So at the top here, you'll notice these two tabs, and by default it's on the arrow tab, which allows me to go in and select things, of course, but we have the camera tab as well. And you remember I mentioned this inner line was representing the camera. Let me click the tab and I'll show you how that actually works. Alright, so let me scroll down as well to the screen area. Now this inner area is actually what the camera follows, if you will. So try to imagine, if you will, remember the camera is attached to the actor called Hero, the little purple actor here. Imagine that this follows that actor around wherever it is. So this is just representing the size, if you will, that it surrounds the actor with. So the actor would always be inside of this camera range, and this camera would be at the top if the movie were to start. So why don't I just show you that, and then we'll talk about some of the influences of these little tabs that we can move around, how they affect how the camera works as well. We'll just leave it at its default. I'm going to hit play, and let's just see what happens here. Okay, so remember, the camera is affixed to the actor called Hero, and that's why we actually see it right now. That scene that we started with is down below, and we haven't reached it yet. So if I use my left and right, I can sort of make him fall down there, I guess. And I'll just let him fall to the bottom here. Oh, and he's hit another platform, so I'm going to jump off of there. And at the bottom. Now you can see just barely a thin sliver of that red bottom. That's because the camera is actually just following this guy. And this is sort of where he landed. Now we can change how that works. So let me just go back here. Actually, before I go back, let's just scroll to the right side as well. So we get to the edge of our frame. Remember, we're at the edge of our scene, and boom, we're actually pushing the background of the scene now, and it seems like we've left that original area, and we're traveling outside of the screen size, if you will, and I can push it back. Now, I do have some issues with this right now, besides that bottom being too thin and not showing the whole part of the red floor, is that when I move across, it has to hit the edge before it starts to move. So take note of that. That invisible line that it hits, that's that inner frame of the camera, if you will. So let's go back to the editor and I'll show you that even more. Let's hide that backstage. So this line here is what the little purple guy is hitting. Once it hits that line, then it triggers the scene to start moving behind, if you will. Now the beautiful thing here is we can actually narrow that line. This up and down is why we weren't seeing the whole floor. Like if I just leave that adjustment now, it can go even more narrow. And imagine again that the purple actor is always inside of this framed area. This camera actually moves around and follows it. It's just here. It's static for the setting purposes, but this whole frame actually follows the actor around. And when the actor bumps into these inner borders, that's what triggers the movement. So let's hit play here. This was just sort of to adjust it to allow for the rest of the scene to appear. And then I'll show you some other subtle things that could easily break it, if you will, but if you know what it's for, it's all about control. You see how now we're seeing the whole floor, and if I scroll here again, it triggers the movement when it hits that sort of inner wall of the camera. And then I'll get right to the edge of the scene, and boom, we're back again. Okay, and I have to push it all the way over. So what I propose to do now is to go back here and just narrow, whoops, let me hit the wrong button there. Just wanted to hide the backstage. Just narrow this inner frame. All right, I'm going to make it extremely small now, and usually this is probably what you would be doing. So I'm making it small. It's actually smaller than the actor, which means the actor will virtually be triggering the motion almost right away after it moves. There is a slight delay, but basically it triggers it almost immediately. Because if you imagine, it's going to bump into any one of these four walls immediately when I start to move it. So let me hit play, and we'll just again bring it down to the floor. Okay, now watch when I start moving. You see how it's a lot quicker to respond, to move across. And I'll say ideally you probably want to have your main actor moving and keeping him in the middle area of the scene versus the far edges of the scene. Now, that's just a rule of thumb. There's no hard and fast rules for that. But regardless of what your intent is, now you know how to control that. And I personally do like this better. And I'm going to ask you to set yours accordingly. So make that little inner camera border very small. As small as you can, basically. All right, but you see how that responds a lot quicker? And now I can see that whole right wall rather, as well as that whole floor. So if I reset, it's going to sort of drop from the sky. It does have a platform high up to land on. And I can jump down sort of as I go here. Skip that. Got a very mild bounce going on. And left and right. Okay, if there's nowhere else to push to, of course it's not going to scroll any further. But if I was to push it out a bit and then come back, you can see how it responds much quicker. So this is what I want you to do for your scrolling scene exercise. Just start with that double jump exercise so that you don't have to redo all the controls and you have actors to work with already. And just expand the scene out. So I'll do a quick review of the big steps. I'm going to actually turn off the camera and go back to arrow here for a second. And let's just go back to our scene attributes. Doubled the size, virtually doubled the size of the width and the height, which gave us all this expanded area. Then physically went in, duplicated some of these elements and resized them and repositioned them accordingly along the way here to fill up these areas. All right, so these are just platforms to jump on. Outside of that basic iPad screen size, which again is indicated with this outer line. And this inner line here, again, if I click on my camera tab, that is what allows the actor, I'll say the protagonist, that has the constrained camera or the control camera behavior attached to it, will interact with. So as soon as it hits any one of these four walls, it will virtually start to trigger movement in the opposite direction. Okay, so that is your scrolling camera, scrolling scene exercise. There is a part 2 for it that I'll have on another lesson, but I'd like you to do this today as the beginning of our class. Again, zip up your project file and hand this in to Blackboard once it's complete. And I'll just play it one more time here. Okay, so we have expanded scene and camera control to follow the actor around. And those are the big takeaways from this particular lesson. And there you go.